it is pretty major what's happening in the backfield without Dalvin Cook. And then there are really battles all over the place. There's a battle at cornerback, there's a battle at safety, and there's certainly where do people fit in along the defensive line.
Welcome into another Purple Insider Extra. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Purple Insider's Matthew Coller. And Vikings Training Camp is just days away now, and we've got a bit of a training camp preview today, Coller. So we'll start off on the offense quickly because I think there's a little bit less to talk about than there is the defensive side of the ball. The big changes on offense are obviously no Dalvin Cook, no Adam Thielen anymore. Everywhere else, though, for the most part, stayed the same, including the offensive line fronts. So what will you be watching in training camp on the offensive side of the ball this coming month?
Yeah, I think it's twofold because, as you mentioned, the quarterback's the same, Justin Jefferson's the same, the offensive line's the same, but it is pretty major what's happening in the backfield without Dalvin Cook. I mean, when is the last time in your life that Dalvin Cook wasn't RB1? I guess 2016 before he got here. He won the job in camp in 2017 and then has been the starting running back and the star running back ever since. So every year you went into camp knowing exactly what you had in the backfield. And this year, they really don't. I mean, with Alexander Mattison, he has proven over a couple of years to be a solid running back. But now, is he going to be taking on the load of RB1, or is it going to be a running back rotation with Kene Nwangwu, with Ty Chandler? Can Dwayne McBride, their seventh round pick, throw his name in the hat here during training camp? I think there's more of a battle between Chandler and Nwangwu for who can carve out some sort of role around Alexander Mattison. But, McBride is a pretty interesting player as well. If you go back and watch his highlight tape from college, it's pretty impressive. So this is the first time that we've had this type of thing going on in the backfield. So judging that from day to day can be a little bit difficult without tackling. But there might be some really intense, preseason games where we're watching who's getting the number of carries and how they're performing and things like that. And then, of course, Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison did not get on the field in OTAs and minicamp, so we really didn't get a close look at him, how he looks on the field, where they're using him, things like that. And, of course, there's no pads in OTAs and minicamp anyway, so it would have been hard to have big takeaways. But once the pads come on, what does Jordan Addison look like in comparison to NFL talent when he does have those pads on? Because there is some knocks on him coming out about his size, but he also has a reputation as being high football IQ guy, a great route runner, a football junkie. But can he threaten for wide receiver too, or will it be clearly KJ Osborne from the outset of training camp that is taking on those duties? And I think everyone wants to know, did they find their future guy to pair with Justin Jefferson? Now, of course, in training camp, I always warn, for the first training camp for a rookie, it does take a while. And sometimes even by the end of camp, we're not sure where that player is going to be in their development when it is their first year. But I think you're looking for signs. A lot of times early on, you can find some signs that somebody's going to be a real player. So very close eye on a daily basis on Jordan Addison.
All right, so then now on to the new look defense. Ed Donatel out, Brian Flores in, also out a number of key players from last season's defense. I want to look at some of the more significant personnel changes in a bit, but first, from an overall perspective, what are the differences you're looking forward to seeing in this defense in training camp?
I think the biggest overall difference is just how many new faces there are. I mean, yes, Brian Flores is going to run more blitzes. He's going to play differently than Ed Donatel. We know that, but it's really hard until you get into game planning, matchups, and all those things to see it on display. I mean, you're seeing them practice, but I also thought the defense looked really good in practice last year during training camp. I think the offense had a tougher time, and then, they came out in week one and put up all those points against Green Bay and so forth, and had a top 10 offense and a bottom 5 defense. So that I wouldn't have expected that last year in camp. So I don't think we can really predict how a defensive coordinator is going to operate. We do know about Flores's playing style. So I guess the biggest question is, how do these guys in Brian Flores's mind fit into what he wants to do? So in minicamp, we saw Josh Metellus being used in some different roles, even coming up to the line of scrimmage, even being in a kind of a linebacker role. And Flores is a guy who will use 3 safeties on the field at the same time. He's going to be aggressive with his defensive backs. So who fits into that best? And then there are really battles all over the place. There's a battle at cornerback, there's a battle at safety, and there's certainly where do people fit in along the defensive line. Marcus Davenport is a guy who's new here and trying to establish himself as a more consistent pass rusher than he was in New Orleans. Well, how does Brian Flores view him? I would even say that there's a little bit of a linebacker battle potentially between Brian Asamoah and Troy Reeder, who's a veteran that they brought in. I think it's Asamoah's job, but how does he fit in with what Flores wants to do is a pretty good question. So it's really all over the field on defense. It could start out in the first practice looking one way, and then by the end of training camp, it could look another way.
All right, so then the group with the most questions heading into training camp, the secondary. Beyond Harrison Smith and newcomer Murphy, seemingly every other spot in that secondary is up for grabs. Who are your favorites to grab some of those spots in training camp this summer?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, at the cornerback, there's kind of three young corners vying for two positions around Byron Murphy Jr. I mean, you have Mekhi Blackman, who was drafted in the third round, and this team really liked and seemed to like how he picked up on the defense because he was getting first team reps in minicamp. And I don't want to overstate what happened in minicamp, but it's the last thing we have to work with. But Blackman looks like he's going to battle with Andrew Booth Jr., who was a second round draft pick from last year for that position. Booth did not get on the field a whole lot, dealt with some injury issues, but he has a lot of talent for sure. And then on the other side of the field, it appears as of right now that a Caleb Evans is in a very good spot to win and hold down that job and be starting week one. But there's a lot of practices to go. And also another interesting wrinkle to this is that they have multiple other teams coming in for joint practices, which is unusual. I haven't covered that before. So there's going to be a lot of looks at opposing wide receivers, not just going up against Jefferson, Osborne, and Addison every day, but opposing wide receivers who are going to come in here for practices that I think will help, Brian Flores and Kevin O'Connell get a good look at these young cornerbacks. And then, I mean, the safety position is really fascinating too, because you have Lewis Cine, who's a first round draft pick, but also Cam Bynum was on the field for every snap last year. They clearly like him as an organization. And then I mentioned Metellus. So can Lewis Cine outplay Cam Bynum, who was the starter for all of last year, enough during this training camp to win him the job? I mean, that's another major question going into camp.
I don't want the special teams to feel like we're leaving them out. Anything that we should know about the special teamers coming into camp?
Well, you have the same long snapper and punter, and I don't think there's a legitimate kicker battle. I guess I would be very surprised if it's anyone than Greg Joseph. And remember last year, Greg Joseph was absolutely phenomenal during training camp. So he loves kicking at the field out at TCO Performance Center. He's won several jobs that way out there, kicking his way into games. So I don't think as of this moment that there are any real special teams battles aside from, there are a lot of guys who, come in as fringe roster players, undrafted free agents. And a lot of times the way to make that 53rd spot is by being a good special teamer. So there are some players, as there always are, who are going to be vying for those spots, who have to, in 3 preseason games, show the coaching staff that that's where they're going to be a difference maker. And every once in a while, you remember the Dan Chesinas of the world, there's some guy where I remember a couple of years ago with him, he would have been the last guy I ever thought made the team, and he made it through special teams. So there's always some great story that comes out of camp.
That's been another Purple Insider Extra for Bring Me the Sports. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the Purple Insider podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Talk to you next time.